It began, as many stories do, with a farewell that seemed ordinary. Rose, the nanny who had lived with the Mwangi family for years, stood in the living room one Saturday morning with her hands clasped nervously before her. Margaret, the mother of the home, noticed the glow on Rose's face before she even spoke. Something had changed in her demeanor, a quiet excitement, a secret joy. "Madam Margaret," Rose said softly, eyes lowered, "I wanted to thank you for everything you and your family have done for me. But I have found someone, a husband, and I believe it is time for me to start my own life." Was silence for a moment. Cynthia, the younger daughter, gasped and clapped her hands, not fully understanding what this meant. Brian, the teenage son, blinked in surprise, his mouth slightly open. Margaret, however, only smiled. "My dear Rose," she said, rising from her chair to embrace her, "you have been like a sister in this house. If you have found love, then who am I to hold you back? May your new life be blessed." The farewell was warm, and though the children were saddened to see Rose go, the family knew she deserved her happiness. But dear listener, as you know, when one door closes, another opens, and not always to the light. Within days, Margaret began searching for another nanny. Daniel, her husband, was away overseas, working as usual, and so the responsibility of finding help for the home fell squarely on her shoulders. A friend recommended a woman from Uganda, young, hardworking, quiet. Her name was Esther. When Esther arrived, she seemed almost too perfect, polite, respectful. She moved about the house like a shadow, never raising her voice, never complaining. In those first weeks, the Mwangi home felt stable again. Meals were on time. The floors sparkled. Cynthia grew fond of her quickly, and even Brian admitted she seemed capable. But dear listener, perfection is a mask, and masks eventually slip. It started with the nights. At first, it was only a strange chill, a cold breeze sweeping through the rooms, though every window was locked, every door shut. The family tried to explain it away, the draft, perhaps, or the Nairobi, weather playing tricks. But soon, the chill became more sinister. Brian woke one night certain that someone was watching him. He opened his eyes and swore he saw a shadow leaning over his bed. When he blinked, it was gone. Cynthia began crying in her sleep, mumbling words no one understood. Even Margaret confessed she felt uneasy at night, as if whispers moved through the walls, and yet, when she called Daniel overseas and told him about these strange happenings, he only chuckled. "Margaret, you've been watching too many horror films. It's just your imagination. Calm the children down. Imagination, dear listener, does not leave bruises." One morning, Margaret noticed tiny marks on Cynthia's arm, like the faint outline of a rope burn. The child could not explain it. "Maybe I scratched myself in the night," she said, though her eyes darted nervously toward Esther's room. Margaret tried to convince herself there was nothing wrong, but the unease deepened. Then came the voices. One evening, Esther announced she would be retiring early to her room. It was just past 8 p.m. The family wished her good night and went about their evening. Hours later, as silence settled in the house, whispers began to echo from down the hallway. They were faint at first, a murmur of voices, like a distant crowd. But as the minutes passed, the whispers grew louder, rising and falling in strange rhythms. It was a language none of them knew, guttural, heavy, almost sung. The family froze in their beds, listening, hearts racing. Then, as suddenly as it began, the chanting stopped. Dear listener, what would you have done in that moment? Would you have rushed to confront her? Or would you, like the Mwangi family, lie frozen in fear, praying for daylight to come when morning arrived? Margaret finally confessed everything to Daniel when he called. Her voice trembled as she described the night whispers, the chill, the shadows. Daniel's tone changed. He was no longer amused. He promised to come home for a short holiday. And when he arrived, he carried with him not only his suitcase, but suspicion. That very evening, as Esther once again declared she would be going to bed early, Daniel quietly installed CCTV cameras in the house. He placed one in the living room, one in the hallway, and one, most importantly, in Esther's room. The children asked what he was doing, but he only said, "Tonight we watch. Tonight we will know the truth." The hours passed. Esther retreated to her room as usual, and silence fell. But in the TV room, the Mwangas huddled together, their eyes fixed on the monitor. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Esther closed her door. She undressed slowly, folding her clothes with care. Then she bent down and drew something on the floor. A circle. From a hidden bag, she pulled out small dolls, crudely made, their cloth bodies tied with red ribbons. She placed them carefully within the circle, then lit a candle. And then she began to chant. Her lips moved fast, words spilling out in a language foreign and frightening. Her body swayed. Her eyes rolled back until only the whites showed. The candle flickered violently, though the air in her room was still. The dolls seemed to twitch in her hands as she tied the ribbons tighter. Cynthia whimpered and buried her face in Margaret's arm. Brian whispered, "Mum, what is she doing?" Margaret's face was pale, her hands trembling. But Daniel stood up, fists clenched. "Enough," he growled without hesitation. He stormed down the hallway. The family followed, their hearts pounding. He flung open Esther's door, and there she was caught in the middle of her ritual, her hands frozen in the air, eyes wide with terror at being discovered. The candle fell, sputtering. The dolls tumbled from her lap. "What is this nonsense?" Daniel thundered. Esther dropped to her knees, tears spilling down her face. "Please forgive me. Please. I was only. Her words dissolved into sobs. But Daniel's fury was greater than her pleas. He grabbed the dolls, the ribbons, the strange items scattered across the floor, and dragged them outside. The family followed, watching in silence as he doused them with kerosene and set them ablaze. The flames roared, sparks flying into the night sky, devouring every trace of Esther's ritual. She stood in the yard, shaking, begging for forgiveness. But Daniel pointed to the gate. "Leave now, and never set foot here again." And just like that, Esther was gone, vanishing into the darkness of the night. The Mwangi family watched the flames, until they died down, their faces lit by the embers. And though the items were destroyed, the memory of that night would haunt them for years to come. But dear listener, that was only the beginning. For evil, once invited, does not leave so easily. The night Esther was cast out, the Mwangi household did not sleep. The fire outside had burned down to black ash, but its smoke seemed to hang in the air, heavy and bitter. Margaret sat on the sofa, her arms around Cynthia, who trembled with every distant dog bark. Brian sat hunched in the corner, staring at the floor as if trying to process the images seared into his mind. Daniel paced. He moved back and forth like a lion in a cage, his fists still clenched. Every so often he muttered, how dare she bring this filth into my house? But beneath his anger was something else. Fear. For dear listener, anger is often the mask men wear when they do not want their families to see how deeply they too are afraid. By morning, Daniel gathered the family. Listen, he said, voice steady, but eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. She is gone. I have burned her things. Whatever she was doing here, it ends now. Do not speak of this again. We will return to normal. And yet, can a family return to normal when shadows have already slipped beneath their doors? The days that followed were uneasy. The cold breeze that had plagued the nights seemed to vanish, as if Esther had carried it away with her. The house was quieter. Margaret tried to convince herself the nightmare was behind them. She scrubbed Esther's room from top to bottom, opened every window, and even sprinkled holy water a friend had given her. But fear leaves an aftertaste, dear listener. You know it well, don't you? That feeling of being watched when no one is there. That tightness in your chest when the night grows too silent. One evening, Cynthia came running into the living room clutching her doll. Mum, I don't want to sleep in my room, she whispered, her eyes wide. The lady is still there. Margaret froze. What lady, my child? The nanny, Cynthia said, hugging the doll tighter. She was standing in the corner, watching me. She smiled, but her teeth were too long. Margaret tried to soothe her, telling her it was only a dream. But Cynthia's eyes were so certain, her little hands so cold, that Margaret's heart filled with dread. Daniel dismissed it as childish imagination. The girl is traumatized, that's all. She'll be fine. But the house still remembered. The CCTV cameras, though Esther was gone, continued to capture strange things. Late at night, when the family replayed the footage, they would see shadows flickering across the walls of the empty hallway, doors opening slightly, then closing. Once, in the grainy footage of Esther's old room, a shape passed by the camera, just a blur, but unmistakably human. Brian was the first to confront his father. Dad, maybe burning her things wasn't enough. What if she left something behind? Daniel frowned. I searched everything. I destroyed it all. But dear listener, how often do we miss the smallest things? How often does evil hide in plain sight, waiting to be discovered? It was Brian who found it. He had gone into Esther's room one afternoon, determined to probe. Daniel shouted over the noise, "Leave us. You are not welcome here." But Esther only laughed, a sound that chilled the marrow. "You think words will drive me away." The charm began to crack, releasing a foul stench. The shadows writhed more violently, reaching for the family. One brushed against Brian's arm, leaving a black mark that burned like fire. He cried out. Margaret sobbed, "Patrick, please." Patrick's voice rose louder, the chant quickening. He took a blade from his satchel and sliced his palm, letting blood drip onto the charm. "By blood I sever you," he declared. The house shook. The candles flickered wildly, some extinguishing. Esther shrieked, her form tearing like paper in the wind. She lunged toward the family, her hands outstretched, her face contorted with rage. Cynthia screamed, but Daniel stepped forward, placing himself between the apparition and his children. "You will not touch them," he roared. And then the charm shattered. A burst of light filled the room, blinding them all. The shadows recoiled, screaming, dissolving into smoke. Esther's form twisted, shrieking in agony as cracks spread across her body like glass breaking. "You cannot be rid of me," she wailed. "I will return." But her words dissolved into nothing as her body shattered into shards of darkness that vanished into the air. Silence fell. The candles flickered once, then burned steady. The walls ceased their groaning. The air grew lighter, as if a storm had finally passed. Patrick slumped, sweat dripping from his brow. "It is done," he whispered. The family sat in stunned silence, trembling, gasping for breath. Cynthia clung to Margaret, sobbing softly. Brian stared at the spot where Esther had vanished, tears streaming down his face. Daniel sank to his knees, burying his face in his hands. Patrick placed a hand on his shoulder. "She is gone, truly gone. The bond is broken." Dear listener, imagine the relief of that moment. After weeks of terror, whispers, shadows, and fear, the Mwangi family could finally breathe. But tell me, if it had been you, would you ever truly feel safe again? In the days that followed, the house was cleansed again and again. Patrick burned incense, sprinkled herbs, recited prayers. Margaret invited the priest once more, who blessed every room with holy water. Daniel ordered the CCTV cameras removed. He never wanted to see another image from them again. Slowly, life began to return to normal. Cynthia's health improved. Brian laughed again, though sometimes his eyes still drifted toward dark corners. Margaret cooked, played music, and opened the windows to let the sunshine flood in. Daniel, though shaken, softened. He drank less, spent more time with his children, and promised Margaret he would never again dismiss her fears. And yet, even in their relief, the family made one firm decision. They would never again hire a nanny. Margaret would manage the home herself, with help from relatives when needed. For though Esther was gone, the memory of her rituals, her whispers, and her shadow would never truly leave them. And so the Mwangi house stood, quiet and whole once more. But sometimes, dear listener, when the night grows too still, Margaret swears she feels a breeze pass through the rooms. And though she tells herself it is only the wind, she pulls her children closer and whispers a prayer. Because evil, once invited, never fully leaves. It only sleeps. And the question, dear listener, is this: if you heard whispers in your walls tonight, would you dare to listen? Or would you close your eyes, praying morning comes quickly? The Mwangi family learned the answer the hard way.